My advice is always to go into the specifics. What's the kind of megawatt capacity? What are some of the values?
So you see it from inception right through to completion and then potentially selling.
It's that kind of experience that clients are looking for, right?
There are obviously some trade-offs moving from consultancy to client side. What would you say that they are? Welcome to Macroscope, your lens into real estate hiring and careers, brought to you by McDonald & Company.
My name is Joseph Corcoran. I'm an associate here at McDonald & Company. I've been with the business for 7 years. I work specifically on our data center team. So we support developers, operators and consultancies on specific data center hires across the UK and Europe.
My name's Calum Moylan. I work for McDonald & Company and I've been here 7 years, specialising in commercial real estate recruitment across property, facilities and asset management with developers, investors and property consultancies across London and the South East.
I think we could both agree that the topic we get asked the most and the most of our calls are about people wanting to make that move from consultancy side to client side. So whether in the data center market, that is somebody who's working capital markets as a broker, wanting to get into the investment side or site selection, or it's a project manager working for a general contractor wanting to get developer side. I'd say, yeah, that is, like I say, probably 90% of our calls. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the vast majority, as you say, you could be a property manager, you could be a facilities manager, it could be in the investment agency space or leasing. But the vast majority of candidates working consultancy side, whether you're large corporate or SME, are, I'm looking to make that move. I see it as the natural next step in my career to go client side. So it's a high proportion of calls, certainly those newly qualified up to a few years PQE, but those later in life or later in terms of their experience as well.
And I think we'll come on to some of the reasons why and kind of go into that. Certainly in the data center sector last year, we saw lots of big moves. So people moving from large consultancies and securing quite big client-side moves. Typically, I would say that is a cycle which happens every kind of 4 or 5 years. Again, people with kind of 3 or 4 years worth of experience, they've kind of grown their networks. They've got a really strong foundation within their respective team, and at that point, they become very desirable to clients, but for a client-side move.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think a lot of people see it as the natural next step because they are reporting into could be one big account, like a Legal and General or an Aviva, for example, but people get siloed or can get siloed and pigeonholed into one specific discipline. And I think the appeal of going client side is the autonomy and you'll have the authority to make decisions on your own portfolios and have a broader scope across your day-to-day working responsibilities.
For sure. Would you say the piece around remuneration as well? Would you say people get better remunerated? Again, certainly we see that on salaries. There is a kind of an increase in salary typically when you move consultancy to client side. Yeah. Potentially on bonus, dependent on what team you're in. If you're in something which is more kind of fee orientated, often that can be more lucrative on the consultancy side. But generally, would you say that remuneration is or salaries improve once you move client side?
Yeah, certainly. And it is probably to be taken with a pinch of salt because there are people that do very well and achieve very well on the consultancy side as well. But certainly moving client side, that tends to be the appeal is salaries and packages and bonuses tend to be that little bit better. I did a piece for a developer towards the end of last year, and on average across their asset management, development, investment teams, they tend to be paying sort of 10-15% better than those doing a similar function within a consultancy.
And again, relating back to kind of data centers, I think once people make that move, a lot of the time they stay client side. So I think rarely do you see somebody getting that move from consultancy side to developer, operator, kind of end user, and then kind of transitioning back across. Would you say it's the
I think again it comes down to the autonomy and the authority that you have to make those decisions, and you often see candidates involved in a full life cycle of a project.
for sure?
So from acquisition to leasing to potentially repositioning that asset, the operational side of it, and then disposing of it. So you see it from inception right through to completion and then potentially selling. And I think often on the consultancy side, you don't always get that. You might see one element of that, but seeing the full remit is for some a lot more interesting.
For sure. I'm sure we'll come on to it, but yeah, it's that kind of experience that clients are looking for, right? So it's a few years into your career, build that strong foundation, get that exposure. So do you think there is a pressure for people to move from consultancy to client side in the areas in which you cover?
I think there might be a pressure to move earlier on in your career. I think for a lot of client organizations that we work with, whether it's an investor, a propco, a developer, they often like to take people on at an earlier stage of their career. So say 1 to 5 years PQE. Those individuals can still be very moldable, they can sort of shape that individual in their own image of what they want out of them. So maybe a sort of pressure people put on themselves to make that move, but it shouldn't be ruled out that you can also make that move later in your career, because we see people with 15, 20, 25 plus years experience do it regularly.
I think for some people that is certainly what they are looking to achieve, and I think if that is their trajectory and that's where they want to end up, like you say, the exposure to decision making, holding the purse strings, making decisions, and kind of having ownership over specific projects, then certainly people I guess have that pressure to move. But for others who enjoy more of a kind of fee generating type role, that kind of brokerage, capital markets, kind of investment piece, or kind of site finding, say on the consultancy side, I think for those people who enjoy that kind of wider networking piece, then they don't feel that pressure, but for sure the pressure is there for them to achieve their goals on the consultancy side too. So people often talk about the upsides to moving client side. We've discussed a few of those already, but what are the kind of pros and cons to both? So working consultancy and client side, in your opinion?
I think there are a few different elements. I think the pros can be around sort of general progression, a broader remit, and improving or building on the skill set that you've already got. As we touched on earlier, you have property managers within a consultancy that perhaps just can perform that property management function. So it could be just doing service charge budgets, rent collection, inspections, and dealing with tenant inquiries, which is absolutely part of moving client side. But if they're moving into a client side asset management role, as an example, they will also have the exposure to lease event work, so lease renewals and rent reviews, leasing and letting strategies around, it could be commercial office space, a retail unit, industrial. You might also get exposure to development schemes, refurb programs. There's so much more perhaps than that full life cycle of an asset that you can get involved with. Autonomy and having the flexibility and the ownership of being the end decision maker, whereas on the consultancy side you're perhaps recommending to a client what they could do with that portfolio. On the client side, you are making that decision and you are hopefully making the best decision for the asset. But I think having that ownership is a lot of what people are after.
Sure. And in terms of progression, so comparing a move in terms of promotions within the client side and compare that to consultancy, how would you compare those two pieces?
So I would say if you're working at a big corporate or an SME, typically you are on a run between surveyor and director. So surveyor, senior surveyor, associate, AD, director tends to be the general trajectory, or to partner, salary partner, whatever it might be. On the client side, and perhaps this is a con, but it depends on how you look at it, there tends to be less structure across the job titles. So if we take asset management as an example, you may start as an asset manager, get promoted to a senior asset management, and then hopefully end up as a head of asset management. So maybe 3 potential promotion criteria or levels that you can get to. Whereas on the consultancy side, there might be more like 6 or 7. Again, it's not a black and white. There are pros and cons to both. Whilst you might be an asset manager or a senior asset manager somewhere, the salary bandings are often quite broad. We get some senior asset managers that are on 80k. We also speak to some that are on 100, 120. So that remit is broader than perhaps a surveyor or senior surveyor might get exposure to consultancy side. So it really depends on the individual and what they want out of their next role, what their aspirations are, and what's important to them at that particular moment, whether it's job title or salary or just general progression. There are obviously some trade-offs moving from consultancy to client side. What would you say that they are?
So I guess a couple of things are kind of network and then kind of perceived risk. So kind of network first. Often when you are working consultancy side, you are working with a multitude of different clients. So the kind of nature of this work and I guess the nature of going and winning kind of new accounts, if that is kind of within your remit, means that you have a fairly extensive networks. You are often going to lots of events, lots of kind of conferences to kind of meet kind of other people within the sector. I guess you could suggest that once you move client side, there is less of that, I guess, kind of importance. The importance is still there, but kind of less of an emphasis on kind of cultivating and kind of maintaining such a large network. So, you could argue that kind of networks get slightly smaller, but then I guess you could argue that that the networks are just in other spaces, right? You go to the decision, you become a decision maker, and you then start working with general contractors, the construction firms, say if you are kind of moving developer side. So your network kind of shifts, I guess, in terms of who you are dealing with specifically. So the second point there is just around risk. So I guess kind of a question and a point. I mean, do we think that staying attached as working client side and working on one specific portfolio, do we feel that there is more risk there in comparison to working consultancy side where you are working on a multitude of different portfolios?
I guess there are pros and cons to both. Perhaps it's not so black and white because you do often within the bigger corporates, you might just get attached to one big account. Similarly, on the client side, yes, you are managing your own portfolio and some of that portfolio may underperform at times. And so there is probably a risk sometimes to both. Like I said, I don't think it can be that black and white. But I suppose working on the client side, you have the autonomy and the flexibility to make those decisions and potentially, if there is one particular asset class that is outperforming others. So at the moment, it might be data centers, for example. It might be the living sector. In the last few years, it perhaps was life sciences, all performing, very well at their own individual times. So you have that ability sometimes to adjust or invest into other things. Whereas I suppose on the consultancy side, the perception might be that you are attached to one particular client, one particular portfolio. And if that portfolio is underperforming, you might not get the flexibility to be able to do anything or sort of change things because at the end of the day, it's the client's decision.
So I guess it's about attaching yourself to a business that has a good reputation in the market, has a good brand. On the consultancy side, is able to win those big accounts and work with those big developers, hyperscalers on my side. And similarly, if you are working client sides, it's about, again, attaching yourself to a strong brand with a strong pipeline, with good cash reserves, and kind of a good investment plan.
Doing your research, I suppose, looking into that company and making sure you are doing your background and you do the due diligence into what their stock is, what that looks like for the foreseeable future, what their investment plans might be, who they're backed by and what that backing looks like. So there are lots of positives to moving client side, but you've got to do your research around exactly who you're going to as well.
So the next topic is around timing. So when is the best time, in your personal opinion, for someone to make that move from consultancy to client side? When is the best time to kind of time the jump?
I would say most of the calls that we receive are from candidates that are newly qualified, up to 5 years PQE. So once they've got their letters and their RICS status, they might be working for X consultancy in X discipline and want to go on to progress their career potentially within a client-side organisation. Can be the best time to move. You are sort of perhaps a younger individual or sort of earlier in your career. A lot of our clients will see that as an opportunity to sort of shape or mold you in their image of what they want for that particular role or that particular portfolio or assets that they're working on. So that's when we tend to see the move happen, but it's not to rule out at all that people, do it later in life or later in terms of their experience. We often speak to those that are, say, 10 to 30 years in that want to make that move. And if sometimes it's just about timing, that particular client is looking for this particular role and you tick all of those boxes. So sometimes it does just come down to timing. I think we're all aware we're in a relatively challenging market. So there might be a few more limited sort of value-add investment asset management roles out there. But if you have the right skill set, you're willing to learn, regardless of age and regardless of number of years of experience, there's absolutely an opportunity and a role out there that somebody will look at you for. It's just about sort of communicating, expressing that experience that you've got in the best way possible.
Great.
Which, again, I'm sure we'll come on to later.
For sure. So I think I would say very similar for the DC side. I mentioned earlier that kind of 3 to 4 year cycle of kind of big moves away from consultancy and into client sides. Kind of, I guess, specifically speaking there around kind of the large real estate consultancies. But I would say that the same is true in terms of years of experience when you are speaking about project managers, design managers, construction or development managers working within the DC space. Often clients typically clients will want someone to have that end-to-end exposure. So from project conception, kind of planning, all the way through to kind of handover. And so if you are working with a kind of a general contractor, working consultancy side, around that kind of 3 to 5 year mark is where hopefully you will have worked on a few projects with a number of different clients, been exposed to different problems, having that kind of problem solving kind of mentality and kind of expertise. But crucially, the lifespan of most of these projects is around 2 years. So within a 3 to 5 year period, hopefully you will have seen through a few projects from start to finish, and that's when you are particularly desirable to a developer or a hyperscaler kind of going kind of end user side.
And something I've failed to mention earlier is yes, I guess the RICS status is important, but it's not always essential. I guess from a consultancy perspective, if you are chartered, you can say to your clients, look, we have 5 to 10 surveyors who are chartered here. We will look after your body of work and your portfolio. But on the client side, you're working on your own portfolio. You're working on your own assets. It's not always an essential sort of prerequisite for some of our clients for you to have that chartered status. If you've got the experience and you are capable and you've got the experience that they're looking for, the letters aren't always the sort of be all and end all. So never be perturbed by, potentially looking at those types of opportunities, even if they say it's essential. If you've got the skill set, they might well look at you.
For sure. And yeah, I think I agree. It's timing, right? And it's what clients want at the end of the day.
Yeah.
In contrary to my point there, if someone is looking for a specific element of experience within a cycle and you have that, then yeah, the move is open. But yeah, I guess we're kind of talking more generally. So let's look at the nuance around certain disciplines and how they kind of transfer from consultancy side to client side.
Okay. So I suppose if we take property management as an example, a lot of property managers will want to go into, say, asset management or estates management. And again, the roles are broader on the client side. So if you're a property manager, you will be used to doing service charge budgets, rent collection, property inspections, liaising with tenants and dealing with tenant inquiries. And absolutely, that is a part of a lot of the asset management roles we see. But asset management, it can be quite a broad title, and there are different disciplines and different roles within it almost. You get asset management roles that are more investment-led. You get asset management roles that are almost quite old school general practice where you're doing a little bit of everything. And then you get asset management roles that are perhaps more development-led. They are a really broad range and mixed bag sometimes. So you have to be tailored about what you're looking at. Make sure you're reading the job description. It sounds obvious, but looking at the detail of what that client actually wants. Vast majority of the roles that we see on our commercial general practice teams are those GP focused roles. So if you're a property manager wanting to get into client side asset management, everything that you have is a great base already, but being able to get some exposure, if you can, to more broader value add work, whether it's lease advisory, so rent reviews, lease renewals, whether it's the letting and leasing of a building, whether it's refurb projects, it's all another string to the bow. It's all a good addition to your skill set, sort of longer term. And same can be applied to investment type asset management roles or development type asset management roles. They can be quite broad. If you are a commercial agent, for example, and you're a Central London West End office agent, and you're wanting to go client side, perhaps that is a bit more prescriptive. You're doing similar work, but your job title as a sort of leasing manager, it might not be quite as broad as, say, a more generalist asset management role. And so any exposure you've got, and it depends on the developer or the investor that you're applying to. Sure. But I think any exposure you can get to sort of a broader remit of work is only going to help you long term.
So I think the most common moves we see, or we have seen in the last kind of 12 to 18 months, consultancy to client side in the DC space, will be people who are working as kind of a broker, kind of cap markets or investment, moving client side into a developer in, say, a kind of a site selection or investment role. We've also seen kind of valuers or surveyors kind of moving client side again into kind of a more kind of asset management type position, with obviously the caveats that you mentioned just then. On the construction side, again, it's the ones we've kind of mentioned previously, but project managers, design managers, construction managers who are moving across to the end user, so kind of a developer or a hyperscaler. I guess I wouldn't say that one is harder than the other per se, taking into consideration the kind of nuances of kind of each of those positions. But I think what can be difficult to make that transition is the wants and needs of the client when kind of recruiting these positions, i.e., does someone need specific data center experience? Do they need to have worked kind of end to end, kind of seen a project from cradle to grave? Do they have to have worked on a certain kind of hyperscale project or a certain kind of megawatt capacity or value perhaps? So that is where the difficulty is kind of trying to, or the ability to tick all of those boxes to make somebody a viable candidate to a client's need.
And the DC space is still, I suppose you compare it to other commercial, retail, office, industrial, still quite a new area of the market for a lot of people.
Sure.
Is there a lot of interest from those outside of DC space wanting to get into it? And if so, what are the sort of barriers maybe that they face?
For sure. So I think a lot of the time we are asked by clients to find people with specific data center experience. Now that is possible, of course, but it's a, I wouldn't say new market. Certainly people who have been working in it for kind of 15 or 20 years would argue the opposite, but certainly in terms of it being front page news and as you mentioned before, kind of one of the kind of hotter areas or hotter sectors in real estate currently. So sometimes that isn't possible, or it certainly kind of reduces the pool size of candidates. So typically outside of that, we would look for people who have worked with kind of what's called mission critical type assets. So other kind of high energy kind of usage assets, and be that from I guess a construction side specifically, or those who are working kind of brokerage side, investment, site selection, who have a good network across what would be logistic players looking to pivot into the data center space, or have brush shoulders with the data center sector generally. So once a candidate has decided they want to make that move client side, that is within their trajectory as they see it for their career, how do they position themselves in the best possible way to be attractive to a client? We've spoken about some of the kind of professional bits already, but I guess in terms of a CV, how do they best sell themselves?
So there are a few different ways to look at it, possibly depending on your current discipline and the type of role that you're applying for. So if we took, if you're a leasing agent, if we took that as an example, putting on the CV specifics of, if you're able to, types of buildings that you've worked on, name the buildings if you can. If you're applying to a grade A office developer, what, if any, grade A office have you previously worked on? Size of the space that you've let, types of tenants that you've worked with and put into that space. It's all very relevant. If you are a property manager, size of service charge budgets that you worked on, rent roll, how many assets have you managed as part of that portfolio? All of that is going to stand out to a potential employer. So in its most basic form, stats, facts and figures will hopefully make you sort of stand out when you're applying for that kind of role. If you're working lease advisory side, what types of lease renewals and rent reviews have you done? Be specific on the asset classes
for sure
that you worked on. It sounds quite basic, but you'd be surprised the amount of people that don't put that kind of granular detail, which is potentially sometimes more of interest to a client looking at a CV than just high level responsibilities. And then aside from the CV, LinkedIn, such a good tool now, as we all know, creating a personal brand, and it's not for everyone, but having a personal brand, or again in its most basic form, just putting a little bit of detail on each role that you've worked on, just so a client can look at your LinkedIn page and go, oh, he's worked here and here, or she's worked here and there for a number of years across different disciplines and different roles, and a little bit. Only needs to be a bullet point or two, just to sort of cover off what you've done. So
great. I would agree. I think often candidates, what we find is when you're having that registration call with them, they've worked on a lot of projects, they've been involved in lots of work, but they talk about things too generally on their CV. So I think it's always important, and my advice is always to go into the specifics. So in terms of projects you've worked on, if you're kind of developer construction size, what's the kind of megawatt capacity, what are some of the values, what were the kind of difficulties that specifically you overcame, and kind of what was your specific role within those kind of large projects. And then on the kind of, I guess, kind of brokerage or kind of fee earning side is specifically what were your numbers, what was the size of kind of deals that you were involved in. Sometimes a kind of a deal sheet can help with that too. It's a kind of a one-stop shop for clients to review kind of previous financial years, and hopefully somebody kind of overperforming their targets. To agree to your point earlier around LinkedIn, certainly I think that has become increasingly important in today's age of kind of content and personal brand, as you mentioned. I think quite regularly, I guess an insight to share is you will be on a call with a client, you will be discussing ex-candidates' experience, and their first instance will be to look on LinkedIn as you're on the call just to get a snapshot of somebody's experience. So I think keeping that up to date, again, as you mentioned, not for everybody, but kind of keeping kind of regular interactions with others. I mean, it helps with the networking piece for sure, and kind of posting kind of relevant articles. Again, I think it helps to give the advantage in any selection process.
It's making yourself stand out against the competition,
For sure,
isn't it? Again, vast majority of our calls are people wanting to make this move, regardless of discipline. So, how do you make yourself stand out against the crowd?
Sure.
Whether it's particular projects you've worked on, whether it's, longevity in a role, which is a basic, but it, can be important. And then, there's specific responsibilities that you've had in each role and how you've broadened your skill set to sort of make yourself appeal to the next employer.
So to summarize, if we had a candidate, our respective markets who approached us today, what are the kind of key takeaways from this discussion that we would get across to them in that call?
Yeah. So there are a few things. So making the decision and making the move at the right time, whether that is for you earlier on in your career once you're qualified and a couple of years PQE, or just have that sort of general experience, or whether it's later in life, being confident about it and having the conviction to do it, then putting your CV in place to make sure it stands out against the competition, on particular projects, on particular roles, on specific disciplines, where you can broaden that skill set. So if you are being pigeonholed or siloed into one particular role within a consultancy, what else can you do to stand out? Is it an investment course? Is it something on the finance side? Is it something to do with asset management? Just something that makes you stand out against the competition. LinkedIn, personal brand, all very important. So I'd say they're the key takeaways.
I would agree. I think it's about having that plan. I think if client side is something, it is the move that you are kind of wanting, and client side is where you are intending to end up. It's about identifying that early on and then getting the right exposure in those initial 3 to 5 years. So whether that is someone who again is more acquisitions, investment, capital markets focused, it's about growing that network, speaking to the right people in the sector, getting your name out there. If we are talking more on the construction development side, it's about really getting the exposure to that kind of cradle to grave kind of element of projects, getting involved in as many projects with as many clients as possible, and kind of really throwing yourself in the deep end, so that you become a kind of a more valuable asset to a client and kind of a more sought after skill set after that kind of initial period of 3 to 5 years.
And I think also when you get to interview stage and in front of these clients and hiring managers, being specific about why you want to join them, why you're interested, show you've done your research and your due diligence. It's not just, I'm sick of this role with this company, and I'll make that move that everybody else is doing. It's, I've worked on these projects. I've seen that you're doing similar. I can see you're investing in this space and growing your organization from this perspective. show that you've done your background on them and having that conviction to make the move.
And I guess just as a summary point around kind of risk, so client side isn't always safer.
No. Yeah, so it's not black and white. It's not consultancy is better than client side. It's not client side is better than consultancy. It's whatever's right for you at the time. And the progression that you want in your career. We see a lot of people who are consultancy side and spend 25, 30 plus years, and they're uber successful and do super well. And likewise, it's the same on the client side. People have some really successful careers, but it's just, again, having that conviction and that understanding of what it is to move client side and own your own projects and work on your own portfolios. And, that's very exciting, but there's a lot of that in the consultancy side too.
I guess you could compare one's career to owning a portfolio, right? It's about gaining value, kind of understanding your potential, and making the right steps towards achieving that.
Absolutely.
If today's discussion on moving from consultancy to client-side roles in real estate was useful, head to the show description for more information and resources. If you are considering your next move from consultancy to client-side, visit macdonaldandcompany.com/contact. Subscribe to @MacDonald&Co on YouTube for more episodes of the Macroscope. You can also listen to the Macroscope series on Spotify.